Welcome to Shuffle Source. I'm your host Brandon, and today we are back with another exciting Precon upgrade video. This time we will be upgrading the Lorehold Spirit Precon from Secrets of Strixhaven. Let's get into it. Really fast, before discussing the commander we will be using, let's quickly go over the Precon upgrade that we use here at Shuffle Source. The first item to note is that we will either use the primary or the backup commander from the Precon deck. Next, we have a cap of around $100 or less that we use when choosing the upgrades. We will be adding 10 cards and we will be removing 10 cards. Additionally, we do add a few what we like to call no budget options near the end of the video, and that's for people who either already have these cards or maybe have a little bit extra in their budget to spend. And lastly, we do use market value pricing provided by TCG Player at the time of recording, which is displayed at the bottom of the screen as we discuss the cards. So the commander we will be discussing today is Quintorius History Chaser for 2, a red and a white. We have a legendary planeswalker Quintorius that has a starting loyalty of 5. Whenever one or more cards leave your graveyard, create a 3/2 red and white spirit creature token. So for +1 loyalty, you may discard a card. If you do, draw 2 cards, then mill a card. For loyalty, spirits you control gain double strike and vigilance until end of turn. And then lastly, Quintorius History Chaser can be your commander. So the first thing to note here is that Quintorius is a planeswalker commander and not a creature. I'm personally a big fan of planeswalker commanders and think that they are a great way to add some variation to your games. Now, he is a graveyard focused commander, which is not all that common in the Boros colors really, so this is a fresh take on that color combination. Now, while it is important to fill our graveyard with this deck, it is equally as important to be able to remove cards from it. And that's because whenever one or more cards leave our graveyard, we get to create a 3/2 red and white spirit creature token. Importantly, this triggers whenever cards leave our graveyard for any reason, whether we're returning them to our hand, casting them from the graveyard, exiling them from an effect, or bringing them back straight to the battlefield. Now, what really helps that game plan move forward there is Quintorius's +1 ability. That's going to let us discard a card, draw 2 cards, and then mill a card. So this is going to help us dig through our deck while also stocking the graveyard with cards that we can use later. Recursion is a big theme of this deck. Now, while you might not use that -4 ability often, it does give our spirits double strike and vigilance until end of turn, which means if we get enough spirit tokens on the board, we can really turn that into a legitimate win condition. So the way we're going to upgrade this deck is by adding more ways to get cards both in and out of our graveyard, improving our token generation and spirit payoffs, and by increasing the deck's consistency when it comes to removal and support pieces. A special thanks to all of our channel members. Your support truly means a lot and we greatly appreciate it. If you'd like to show your support and get access to some exclusive perks, consider becoming a channel member by clicking the join button below. You can also support the channel by liking, subscribing, and dropping a comment. Thank you. And now let's get back to the video. So we've now made it to the additions portion of the video, and we are going to kick things off with Arc of Hunger. For 2, a red and a white, we have an artifact that says whenever one or more cards leave your graveyard, this artifact deals 1 damage to each opponent and you gain 1 life. You can also tap it, mill a card, you may play that card this turn. So Arc of Hunger is an incredible addition because it supports both halves of Quintorius's game plan all by itself. The activated ability helps fuel our graveyard by milling a card, but more importantly, it lets us play that card this turn. That means Arc of Hunger can often set up its own trigger by immediately moving a card out of our graveyard, assuming we can play it. And whenever one or more cards leave our graveyard, Arc of Hunger deals 1 damage to each opponent and gains us 1 life. Since Quintorius is already rewarding us for doing this exact thing, this essentially just gives us an additional payoff every time we would otherwise trigger our commander. So now with this card and Quintorius on the battlefield, not only are we getting a 3/2 spirit, but we're also draining the entire table and gaining life at the same time. And here we have the next of our additions. We have Bannon the Returner's Leader. For 1 red and 1 white, we have a 1/3 legendary creature, Human Cleric Rebel, that has the ability Prey. Once during each of your turns, you may cast a creature spell from among cards in your graveyard that were put there from anywhere other than the battlefield this turn. And it also says whenever you attack, you may pay 1 and discard a card. If you do, draw a card. So the reason I really like this card here is because it gives us a repeatable way to get creatures out of our graveyard while also helping us fuel the graveyard in the first place. Once during each of our turns, we can cast a creature from our graveyard that was put there this turn without it ever having to die first. That works incredibly well with Quintorius because casting that creature means it leaves our graveyard, netting us a spirit token. And since Quintorius' +1 ability has us discard and mill cards, it's actually very easy for us to put creatures into the graveyard from our hand or library and then immediately cast them with Bannon. The attack trigger on here is also nice because it gives us additional looting. We can pay the 1, discard a card, and draw a card. This helps us dig through the deck while putting more cards into the graveyard for future turns. Next up we have a Road. For 1 white we have an instant that says destroy target creature or planeswalker. Its controller may search their library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. So a Road is an easy upgrade because it's simply one of the most efficient removal spells available to this deck. For just a single white mana, we can destroy a creature or planeswalker at instant speed. Now yes, the controller will get a basic land, but that's a very small price to pay for removing a problematic threat so efficiently. We'd much rather let an opponent have 1 extra land than allow a game-winning creature or planeswalker to stay on the battlefield. I do like that it can hit both creatures and planeswalkers. A lot of cheap removal spells are more limited to just one or the other, but a Road gives us that flexibility to do either. There's also nothing stopping us from using this on one of our own creatures if we're really in a situation where we need that ramp. And because it does destroy rather than exile, if we target one of our own non-token creatures, it will go to the graveyard where we might be able to recur it later as part of our game plan. And here we have Flashback. For 1 red, it is an instant that says target instant or sorcery card in your graveyard gains flashback until end of turn. The flashback cost is equal to its mana cost. For just a single red mana, we can give an instant or sorcery in our graveyard flashback until end of turn, which allows us to cast it again. As soon as we cast that spell from the graveyard, it leaves the graveyard and immediately triggers Quintorius, which will create us that token. We're not only getting a spirit token if our commander's out, but we're also getting a second use out of one of our best spells. Whether it's removal, card draw, recursion, or interaction, Flashback effectively lets us double up on effects that we already wanted to play. And here's our next addition, Ghost Vacuum. For 1 colorless, we have an artifact that allows you to tap it to exile target card from a graveyard, or you can pay 6, tap it, sacrifice Ghost Vacuum, put each creature card exiled with Ghost Vacuum onto the battlefield under your control with a flying counter on it. Each of them is a 1/1 spirit in addition to its other types, activate only as a sorcery. So this is definitely one of the more fun additions here because it's going to give us graveyard interaction while also synergizing with the spirit theme of the deck. For just 1 mana, we get a repeatable way to exile cards from graveyards, which means we can target our own graveyard when we want to trigger Quintorius or disrupt an opponent's graveyard strategy when necessary. Since our commander cares only about cards leaving our graveyard, Ghost Vacuum can become a reliable way to generate spirit tokens simply by exiling cards one at a time. And then later in the game, it has a potentially big payoff attached to it. Once we've exiled enough creatures, we can sacrifice Ghost Vacuum and put all of those creatures onto the battlefield under our control. They even become spirits and gain flying, which means they synergize nicely with a lot of our spirit synergies. Next up, we have Hardened Academic. For 1 red and 1 white, we have a 2/1 creature bird cleric that has flying and haste. You can also discard a card. This creature gains lifelink until end of turn. And whenever 1 or more cards leave your graveyard, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. So I like this addition because it gives us yet another discard outlet and helps reward us for cards leaving our graveyard. The discard ability is especially great here because it allows us to fuel our graveyard and trigger any discard payoffs we may have at instant speed. This can be very useful for putting key cards into our graveyard for future recursion plays. Also, when 1 or more cards leave our graveyard, we get to put a +1/+1 counter on a creature we control. And since this deck is built around repeatedly moving cards out of our graveyard, those counters can really add up quickly over the course of a game. Every recursion spell, flashback effect, or graveyard casting effect is now helping us grow our board in addition to creating those spirit tokens. And here we have Monument to Endurance. For 3 colorless, we have an artifact that says, whenever you discard a card, choose one that hasn't been chosen this turn. You can either draw a card, create a treasure token, or each opponent loses 3 life. So Monument to Endurance is a bit pricey, but it is an excellent addition because it turns all of our discard effects into additional value. Quintorius already allows us to discard cards through his +1 ability, and other looting effects are in the deck as well. This card is going to reward us for something that we were already planning on doing. Now what makes this card particularly strong is its flexibility. Each turn, our discard effects can be converted into either card draw, mana through treasure tokens, or direct loss of life to our opponents depending on what we need at the moment. Now this obviously pairs well with Hardened Academic, which we just went over, because now we have flexibility to discard as many cards as we want across multiple turns to trigger these modes however we would like them to. I also like that all three modes are relevant here. Sometimes we need more cards, sometimes we need mana to cast multiple spells in a turn, and sometimes we just want to start draining the table and closing out the game. And next we have on Wings of Gold, for 3 colorless and a white, we have an enchantment that says creatures you control that are zombies and or tokens get +1/+1 and have flying. Whenever one or more cards leave your graveyard, create a 1/1 white zombie creature token. So this is another outstanding addition here because it gives us both a payoff and a token generator for doing exactly the same thing that we want to be doing with Quintorius. Whenever one or more cards leave our graveyard, we now get to create a 1/1 zombie token, which means with Quintorius also creating spirit tokens, we're generating even more board presence. And unlike some token makers that need additional setup, this card is tied directly to our primary game plan. If we're recurring cards, casting from the graveyard, or exiling cards for value, we're naturally creating zombies along the way. The Anthem effect here is also really relevant. Not only do the zombie and spirit tokens get bigger, but both of those tokens also gain flying. Since ideally Quintorius is already producing a steady stream of spirit tokens, giving our token army evasion makes it much easier to convert that value into actual damage, especially with the increased power. And here we have Renewed Solidarity, for 2 colorless and a white. We have an enchantment that says, as this enchantment enters, choose a creature type. Creatures you control of the chosen type get +1/+0. At the beginning of your end step, for each token you control of the chosen type that entered this turn, create a token that's a copy of it. So Renewed Solidarity is an incredible payoff here because it's going to really allow us to start multiplying the amount of spirit tokens that we're creating with Quintorius. So obviously when this card enters, we're going to choose spirit, and from that point on, all of our spirits get a small power boost, but the real reason we're playing it is because of that second ability. At the beginning of our end step, for each spirit token that entered the battlefield this turn, we create another copy of it. Since our commander is constantly creating 3/2 spirit tokens throughout the game, our board presence can really snowball if it's left unanswered. This is the sort of card that can take a board of just a few spirits and turn it into a legitimate threat in a few turns. And here we have the last of our additions. We have Spiteful Banditry, for X and 2 red. We have an enchantment that says, when Spiteful Banditry enters the battlefield, it deals X damage to each creature. Whenever one or more creatures your opponents control die, you create a treasure token. This ability triggers only once each turn. So the reason I like Spiteful Banditry here is because it is a board wipe that's attached to a permanent that is also scalable. Since it has X in the cost, we can tailor it to the board state. Sometimes we only need to clear away some small creatures. Other times we may want to invest more into it to wipe out a much larger portion of the battlefield. And as you'll see in the upcoming removals, we actually are removing some of the weaker or less synergistic board wipes from the Precon, so I did want to add another one back into the deck. The difference here is that Spiteful Banditry doesn't just wipe the board and go away. It continues to at least generate some value with that treasure generation as long as our opponent's creatures continue to die. And because this is an enchantment, we can actually get it back with several of the recursion cards that we have in the deck. We've now made it to the removals portion of the video, and we are going to kick it off with AO the Donsky, for 3 colorless and 2 white. We have a 5/4 legendary creature Dragon Spirit that has flying and vigilance. When AO dies, choose one. Look at the top 7 cards of your library. Put any number of non-land permanent cards with total mana value 4 or less from among them onto the battlefield. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Or you can put 2 +1/+1 counters on each permanent you control that's a creature or vehicle. So AO the Donsky is an okay card, but it doesn't really contribute to the deck's game plan. Even with it being a spirit, AO is much more of a generic value creature than a card that really supports our graveyard strategy. Problem here is that neither of AO's death triggers actually gets us cards in or out of our graveyard, which means it doesn't help us trigger Quintorius at all. We're basically spending 5 mana for a creature that can generate us some value, but only when it dies. And next on the chopping block, we have Atsushi the Blazing Sky, for 2 and 2 red. We have a 4/4 legendary creature Dragon Spirit that has flying and trample. When Atsushi dies, choose one. Exile the top 2 cards of your library. Until the end of your next turn, you may play those cards, or you can create 3 treasure tokens. So Atsushi falls into a very similar category to me as AO. It is a spirit creature that otherwise doesn't really support the deck's plan. Now when Atsushi dies, we either get to get some card advantage or create some treasures, both of which are useful, but neither of them help us get any cards out of our graveyard or trigger our commander. Similarly to AO, the card is also relying on a death trigger to generate any value from those abilities, which means we need it to die before it really does anything other than attack and block. I feel like for 4 mana, we'd much rather be playing cards that actively contribute to our engine right away, instead of waiting for them to be removed first. And here we have Kami of Ancient Law for 1 and a white. We have a 2/2 creature spirit that says sacrifice this creature, destroy target enchantment. So Kami of the Ancient Law is just a little too narrow and low impact compared to the upgrades that we're making to this deck. At the end of the day, this is just a 2/2 creature that can sacrifice itself to destroy an enchantment, and that's all it does. And while sacrificing it does actually put it in the graveyard, it doesn't help us get cards out of our graveyard, which is what Quintorius really cares about. Overall, this just ends up being a low impact utility creature that doesn't contribute enough to our plan. Our next removal is Kirill History Buff. For 1 red and a white, we have a 2/3 legendary creature vampire cleric that says whenever 1 or more cards leave your graveyard, Kirill becomes prepared. While it's prepared, you may cast a copy of its spell. Doing so unprepares it, and the spell it's referring to is Pack a Punch. For 1, a red and a white, we have a sorcery that says mill a card, put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature. It gains trample until end of turn. Now, Kirill is one of the newer cards that features the prepared mechanic, and while it technically works with Quintorius, I think it ends up being one of the easier cuts once we start upgrading the deck. So it prepares whenever 1 or more cards leave our graveyard, which is something that we want to be doing, sure. However, the problem is that the spell payoff attached to it is not really worth the cost, in my opinion. Pack a Punch mills a card, puts 2 counters on a creature, and gives it trample. I mean, that's fine, but it's not really advancing the strategy we're trying to build around beyond really milling that first card. Sure, it being able to prepare itself means this spell can be repeatable, but you're paying 3 mana each time, and that just feels like a heavy investment. And here we have Perpetual Timepiece for 2 colorless. We have an artifact that you can tap to mill 2 cards, or you can pay to exile this artifact, shuffle any number of target cards from your graveyard into your library. So to me, this just feels a lot like a setup card without enough of a payoff attached to it to keep it over any of the other additions that we're adding. The first ability mills 2 cards, which can help us fill the graveyard. As we've talked about throughout this upgrade, filling the graveyard isn't necessarily the hard part. What Quintorius really cares about is getting cards back out of the graveyard once they're there. I understand the purpose of the second ability is to save your graveyard if someone tries to Bajuka Bog it, for example. However, that is very situational, and this only has a one-time effect. And here's our next removal, Rip Apart. For 1 red and 1 white, we have a sorcery that says choose one. Rip Apart deals 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker, or you can destroy target artifact or enchantment. So Rip Apart is an okay removal spell, but it ends up getting cut here because we're really upgrading it into a more efficient and more impactful removal spell. The flexibility is nice. Being able to deal 3 damage to a creature or planeswalker or destroy an artifact or enchantment means it's rarely a dead card. However, 3 damage doesn't simply answer a lot of creatures that matter in the format later in the game, and while artifact and enchantment removal is useful, we do have access to other cards in the deck that can help with that as well. We're also adding cards like Erode to this deck that can answer much larger threats for only a single mana and at instant speed. And here we have our next removal, Secret Rendezvous. For 1 and 2 white. We have a sorcery that says you and target opponent each draw 3 cards. So as I've said in other Precon upgrade videos, Secret Rendezvous is just one of those cards that maybe look better on paper than it actually tends to play out in actual gameplay. Drawing 3 cards for 3 mana is definitely appealing, but I really don't like and don't advise on giving an opponent 3 cards in return. The idea behind this card is that it's more of a political card, but in practice, I think that those politics can end up being unreliable. The player that you choose to help on this given turn when you cast the spell may very well be the player who eliminates you a few turns later, maybe with the cards you helped them draw. Overall, the upside here just is not worth feeling our opponent's hand when there are other avenues for us to draw cards in the deck. And here's one of our next removals. We have Tragic Arrogance. For 3 colorless and 2 white. We have a sorcery that says for each player, you choose from among the permanents that player controls an artifact, a creature, an enchantment, and a planeswalker. Then each player sacrifices all the other non-land permanents they control. So this is one of the board wipes that I mentioned earlier about wanting to cut from the deck. 5 mana is a significant investment for it actually not wiping the board completely. It allows each of our opponents to keep some board presence. We also added Spiteful Banditry as one of our replacement board wipes. Not only is that one more scalable to the situation, but it also is an enchantment, and we have multiple ways to get it back if it ends up in the graveyard. And here we have our next removal, Wave of Reckoning, for 4 colorless and a white. We have a sorcery that says each creature deals damage to itself equal to its power. So Wave of Reckoning is another one of those board wipes that I was talking about from the Precon that I felt was a very easy cut. The biggest issue here is that it isn't a guaranteed board wipe. Instead of simply destroying creatures, it relies on creatures dealing damage to themselves equal to their power. That means creatures with high toughness, indestructible creatures, or other various board states can make those creatures survive this effect. Now, this card is much better in a dedicated Toughness Matters deck, where most of your creatures have significantly higher toughness than power. In those decks, you can often wipe your opponent's boards while keeping most of your own creatures alive, but that's not at all what we're doing here. In fact, this card is actually quite awkward in this deck, especially with the spirit tokens that Quintorius creates, because they're 3/2, which means their power is greater than their toughness, and then that means they die to this spell. Overall, this is a fine reprint. It just needs to be in the appropriate deck. And here we have the last of our removals. We have White Orchid Phantom for 2 white. We have a 2/2 creature Spirit Knight that has flying and first strike. When this creature enters, destroy up to 1 target non-basic land. Its controller may search their library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. Now, White Orchid Phantom is an okay card, and I think the reason it was probably added is because it has the spirit creature type, but I found it to be an easy cut. Now, while taking out a powerful utility land can occasionally be useful, most commander tables that I see with these kind of precons aren't necessarily won or lost because of 1 non-basic land being destroyed. Hey everyone, I wanted to take a moment to give a huge shout out to our partner, the Mighty Meeple. If you're in or visiting the Concord, North Carolina area, the Mighty Meeple is the local game store to check out. Their team is friendly, knowledgeable, and always ready to help you find exactly what you need. From magic and board games to minis and more, whatever your hobby, they've got you covered. And even if you're not local, no problem. You can shop for Magic singles and other TCGs at mightymeeple.com. Use promo code SHUFFLE for 5% off your order. Thank you. And now let's get back to the video. We have now made it to the no budget options portion of the video, and we are going to kick things off with Crucible of Worlds for 3 colorless. We have an artifact that says you may play land cards from your graveyard. Now, Crucible of Worlds is a powerful addition for this deck because it gives us a way to get the lands that we may have discarded or milled out of our graveyard, and at the same time help us trigger Quintorius for more spirit tokens. Since we care about cards leaving the graveyard, if we play a land from our graveyard, that will immediately trigger our commander and create that spirit token. And here we have our next no budget option. We have Elspeth Stormslayer for 3 colorless and 2 white. We have a legendary planeswalker Elspeth that has a starting loyalty of 5. If 1 or more tokens would be created under your control, twice that many of those tokens are created instead. For +1, we can create a 1/1 white soldier creature token. For 0, we can put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Those creatures gain flying until end of turn. Or -3, destroy target creature an opponent controls with mana value 3 or greater. So Elspeth is such a powerhouse here because she does almost everything this deck wants in a single card. Now, the biggest reason we are adding her is for that static ability. If 1 or more tokens would be created under our control, we get to create twice that many instead. Since Quintorius is constantly creating us spirit tokens as cards leave our graveyard, Elspeth is effectively doubling up on what our commander is doing. Now, off a single Quintorius trigger, we are getting 2 3/2 spirit tokens instead, and things can get out of hand really quickly for our opponents. And unlike some other token doublers that really don't do much else, every ability on Elspeth is relevant here. Her +1 creates additional creature tokens, which helps us build our board. Her 0 ability is especially powerful in this deck. Putting a +1/+1 counter on our entire board and giving everything flying can turn a battlefield full of spirits and tokens into a very real threat. And then even her last ability for -3 gives us a piece of removal if we really need it. And we've now made it to the last of our no budget options, and probably to to no one's surprise, here we have Smothering Tithe for 3 colorless and 1 white. We have an enchantment that says whenever an opponent draws a card, that player may pay 2. If the player doesn't, you create a treasure token. So straight up, Smothering Tithe is one of the strongest white cards ever printed, and it's an easy inclusion here because Boros colored decks really love additional ramp. Between recursion effects, graveyard engines, and some of our other expensive payoffs, having access to additional mana can make a huge difference. In your typical commander game, opponents are drawing cards pretty frequently, which means Smothering Tithe can generate an enormous amount of treasure tokens over the course of a game. Most players simply are not going to pay the extra 2 every time. Now, I know that Smothering Tithe doesn't directly trigger Quintorius here, but it helps fuel the cards that do. Sometimes the best support cards aren't the ones that interact with the commander directly, they're the ones that make the entire deck function more smoothly. And there you have it. After upgrading this deck, we have a final upgrade cost of $52.66. This total does not include the no budget options that we covered. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to like and subscribe for more videos. Let me know what you think about the Lorehold Spirit Precon. What are your thoughts about the set overall? I think Secrets of Strixhaven is in one of my top 5 favorite sets. And as always, until next time, thank you for watching.